It had been a long day at work, and I was looking forward to getting home, kicking off my shoes, and relaxing. The traffic was lighter than usual, so I decided to take the scenic route, something to break up the monotony of the usual route home. My girlfriend, Jenna, had mentioned she was taking the afternoon off to catch up on some freelance work, so I figured it would be a quiet evening. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Jenna's car was already there, which was a bit unusual. She usually didn't finish her work that early. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe she was wrapping up some personal errands. But then, as I opened the door and heard voices from the living room, something inside me shifted. I heard her voice. "Oh my God, you should have seen the look on his face when I told him I'd be working late again. He totally bought it." She laughed. "I swear, he's so clueless. He has no idea what I've been doing behind his back. It's almost too easy." My heart sank, and I stood frozen in the hallway, unable to move. The conversation continued, but I couldn't bring myself to walk into the room. Every word she said felt like it was breaking me piece by piece. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest as Jenna's words echoed in my ears. Her laughter was carefree, the kind of laugh she used to reserve for moments we shared together. Now, it was laced with cruelty aimed at me, the man who had trusted her completely. You know, Jenna continued, her tone smug. I actually felt a little guilty at first. But after the first time with Brandon, I realized how much fun I'd been missing. Evan's so predictable. It's like dating a golden retriever. Sweet, loyal, but boring. Brandon. The name hit me like a sledgehammer. He was one of her coworkers, someone she'd mentioned casually in passing, someone I'd never given a second thought. I mean, don't get me wrong, she added. Evan's a good guy. But Brandon? He knows how to make me feel alive. It's like fireworks every time we're together. I just wish he wasn't so paranoid about getting caught. It's not like Evan's smart enough to figure it out. My fists clenched at my sides as anger and disbelief coursed through me. I wanted to storm into the room, to confront her and whoever she was talking to, but I couldn't move. The betrayal felt too raw, too overwhelming. I leaned closer to the edge of the hallway, trying to get a glimpse of her without being seen. Jenna was lounging on the couch, her phone pressed to her ear, a glass of wine on the table beside her. She looked completely at ease, as if she had nothing to hide. Brendan keeps asking me to leave Evan, she said, swirling the wine in her glass. But why would I? I've got the best of both worlds. Evan pays the bills, and Brandon, well, he keeps things interesting. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. I had worked hard to provide for us, to give her the life she deserved. I had trusted her, loved her, and this was how she repaid me. My first instinct was to burst in and demand answers, but I stopped myself. What would that accomplish? She'd deny it, twist the narrative, make excuses. And Brandon? He was likely laughing at me too, feeding into the lies she told herself to justify what she was doing. Instead, I backed away silently, retreating to the bedroom. My mind raced as I grabbed my laptop and began searching for anything that could confirm what I had just heard. If Jenna was this bold on the phone, there had to be more. Texts, emails, something. Sure enough, I found it. Her phone synced to the cloud, and within minutes, I was scrolling through messages that left no room for doubt. Brandon. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Jenna. Me too. You have no idea how hard it was to leave your place this morning without kissing you goodbye. The messages painted a clear picture of their affair, stolen moments during lunch breaks, late-night meetups, and plans for weekends away. She had lied to me so easily, weaving a web of deceit while I sat at home, oblivious. My anger simmered as I closed the laptop. I couldn't stay here, not tonight. If I stayed, I might say or do something I'd regret. I grabbed an overnight bag, stuffing it with essentials. As I zipped it up, I heard Jenna's laughter again from the living room, carefree and mocking. I walked past the doorway, unseen, and slipped out of the house. The cool night air hit me like a wake-up call as I climbed into my car. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't coming back. At least, not until I had a plan. Jenna thought she could outsmart me, but she had underestimated just how much she had unleashed. As I drove away, I couldn't shake her words from my mind. Evan's so predictable. Maybe I had been predictable. But that was about to change. I spent the night at a hotel on the edge of town, the sterile room a stark contrast to the home Jenna and I had built together. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my bag at my feet, I stared at my phone. There were no texts, no missed calls, nothing from Jenna. She didn't even realize I was gone. I scrolled through the messages I had saved from her cloud account, each one a gut-wrenching reminder of her betrayal. But instead of letting the pain consume me, I focused on the bigger picture. Jenna wasn't just unfaithful, she was arrogant about it. She thought she could walk all over me, and for months she had. That was about to change. The next morning, I called my best friend, Matt. He'd always been the kind of guy who saw things clearly, unafraid to call it like it was. If anyone could help me navigate this, it was him. Evan, Matt said when he picked up, his tone surprised. You never call this early. What's up? I hesitated for a moment, then said, Can I come by? I need to talk. Of course, Matt replied. Everything okay? Not really, I admitted. I'll explain when I get there. Matt's apartment was a small, cozy space filled with mismatched furniture and the lingering smell of freshly brewed coffee. He ushered me inside, handing me a mug before I even sat down. All right, he said, sitting across from me. What's going on? I took a deep breath and told him everything. From Jenna's conversation the night before to the messages I'd found, I laid it all out. Matt listened quietly, his expression darkening as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back, shaking his head. That's low, even for someone like Jenna, he said. I frowned. What do you mean, someone like Jenna? Matt hesitated, then sighed. Look, I didn't want to say anything before, but I've always thought she had this selfish streak. She loved being the center of attention, and you gave her that. But it sounds like she's been taking you for granted for a long time. His words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. I had bent over backward for Jenna, always putting her needs above my own. And this was how she repaid me. So what's your plan? Matt asked. I don't know yet, I admitted. I just know I can't go back to her pretending everything's fine. Matt nodded. Good. Don't let her manipulate you. She's already shown you who she really is. We spent the next few hours talking through my options. Matt suggested confronting Jenna with the evidence and demanding she leave the house, but I wasn't sure if I wanted a confrontation. Part of me thought she didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing how much she had hurt me. That afternoon, I made a decision. I wasn't going to give Jenna the chance to worm her way out of this. I'd seen enough to know that the woman I thought I loved was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't trust. I called a lawyer, explaining my situation and asking for advice. She was direct and efficient, outlining my rights and the steps I needed to take if I wanted to end things cleanly. Gather as much evidence as you can, she said. Photos, texts, anything that shows her infidelity. It'll help if there are any disputes about property or assets later on. I've got plenty of that, I replied. Good, she said. Then the next step is deciding how you want to handle the confrontation. By the time I left her office, I felt a sense of clarity. I couldn't control what Jenna had done, but I could control how I responded. That evening, I returned to the house. Jenna was in the living room, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. She glanced up when I walked in, her expression mildly surprised. "Hey," she said casually, "where were you last night?" "Write in the comments. I didn't hear you come to bed." I stared at her, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "I had some things to take care of," I said evenly. Jenna shrugged, already turning her attention back to her phone. "Okay, well, dinner's in the fridge if you're hungry." Her indifference was infuriating, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to tip my hand, not yet. As I sat in the kitchen, eating a meal she had prepared without a second thought, I began laying the groundwork for what was to come. Jenna had no idea that the life she thought she controlled was about to come crashing down. And when it did, she would finally understand the consequences of her actions. The days that followed were a test of my patience. Every time Jenna smiled at me or acted like nothing was wrong, it was a struggle not to confront her. But I reminded myself that my plan needed to be executed carefully. There was no room for emotion, no room for error. I kept my interactions with Jenna minimal, giving her just enough attention to avoid suspicion. Meanwhile, I worked behind the scenes to gather everything I needed for what was to come. One evening, as Jenna was taking a shower, I seized the opportunity to access her phone again. This time, I wasn't just looking for evidence, I wanted to see how deep her betrayal went. Her messages with Brandon were still there, as shameless as ever. Brandon: "I can't wait to see you this weekend." "Think he'll buy another excuse?" Jenna: "Of course he will. Evan doesn't question anything I say." I clenched my jaw, scrolling further. Their plans were explicit. Another meetup at his place while I was supposedly working late. I forwarded the messages to myself, along with a series of photos Brandon had sent her. Pictures of the two of them together, laughing in bed, oblivious to the destruction they were causing. I also started talking to mutual friends, subtly steering the conversation toward Jenna and Brandon without giving away what I knew. Most people didn't suspect anything, but one or two hesitated before answering, their discomfort clear. "Do you think they're close?" I asked a friend during one such conversation. "Well," she said, choosing her words carefully, "they do seem to spend a lot of time together. But I'm sure it's nothing." Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Finally, I prepared my exit strategy. With the help of my lawyer, I drafted a letter formally ending our relationship, detailing the evidence of her infidelity and my intention to sever all ties. I arranged for my finances to be protected, freezing our joint accounts and rerouting my paychecks to a separate account. The house was in my name, so I had the legal right to ask her to leave. And that's exactly what I planned to do. The night before her planned rendezvous with Brandon, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the confrontation in my mind. Would she deny it? Try to turn the blame on me? Or would she crumble under the weight of her own guilt? By morning, my resolve was steel. That evening, I waited for Jenna to leave. She dressed casually, grabbing her bag and keys without a second glance in my direction. "Heading out for a bit," she said, barely pausing as she walked out the door. "Okay," I replied, my tone neutral. The moment the door closed behind her, I got to work. I packed her belongings into boxes, carefully separating them from mine. I changed the locks on the front door and left her letter on the kitchen counter, placed neatly next to the photos and messages I had printed out. When Jenna returned a few hours later, the sight that greeted her was unmistakable. The boxes lined up in the entryway, the letter and evidence waiting for her like a final judgment. She called out my name, her voice sharp with confusion. "Evan? What's going on?" I step out of the living room, keeping my expression cold. I think you know exactly what's going on. Her eyes darted to the counter, widening as she saw the photos and texts. She rushed over, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. Evan, I can explain, she said quickly, her voice panicked. No, Jenna, I interrupted, my voice firm. You don't get to explain. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and laughing about it behind my back. There's nothing you can say that will change that. Her face crumpled, and she started to cry. I made a mistake, she sobbed. It didn't mean anything, I swear. I shook my head, anger simmering just beneath the surface. Don't insult me by pretending this was a mistake. You didn't trip and fall into his bed, Jenna. You made a choice. Over and over again. She reached for me, but I stepped back. We can work through this, she pleaded. Please, Evan, don't do this. This? I repeated, my voice rising. You did this, Jenna. You destroyed what we had. I'm just cleaning up the mess. I pointed to the boxes. Your things are packed. The locks have been changed. I want you out by tomorrow morning. Her tears turned to anger. You can't just throw me out like this, she snapped. I can and I am, I said coldly. You don't deserve to stay here. Not after everything you've done. Jenna stared at me, her face a mix of fury and despair. But she didn't argue further. She stormed past me, slamming the door behind her as she left. The silence that followed was deafening, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The weight of her lies, her betrayal, was gone. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I would never let anyone treat me like that again. The morning after Jenna stormed out, the house felt eerily quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty spot where she used to sit, her betrayal still a fresh wound. But as the silence stretched on, I realized it wasn't the oppressive kind I'd felt in the days leading up to her departure. It was the calm of a storm that had finally passed. I spent the day clearing out the remnants of our life together. The photos, the notes, the small tokens of affection that once meant something. They all went into a box destined for the attic. They weren't worth looking at now, but I couldn't bring myself to throw them away just yet. Jenna had texted me once that morning. Jenna, Evan, please, can we just talk? One more chance. I'll do anything. I didn't respond. Her words felt as hollow as her promises of love and fidelity. She'd had more than enough chances to come clean, to tell me the truth before I discovered it on my own. She had chosen deceit instead. Later that afternoon, Matt dropped by unannounced, carrying a six-pack of beer and a pizza. Thought you could use some company, he said, setting everything on the counter. I laughed for the first time in days. Thanks, man. I needed this. We sat in the living room, eating and drinking while talking about everything except Jenna. Matt didn't press me for details, and I appreciated the distraction. It reminded me that I still had people who cared about me, even if the one person I trusted most had let me down. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages, started going to the gym again, and even signed up for a photography class, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off for Jenna's sake. I also met with my lawyer to finalize the legal aspects of Jenna's departure. The process was straightforward, thanks to the evidence I'd gathered and the house being in my name. It was a clean break, one that left no room for her to manipulate or guilt me into reconsidering. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I noticed a post from Jenna. She had shared a picture of herself out with friends, smiling brightly as if nothing had happened. The caption read, "Starting fresh. Here's to new beginnings." It stung at first, but then I realized I didn't care. She could paint her life however she wanted, but I knew the truth. She'd lost more than just a relationship. She'd lost someone who would have given her the world. And I wasn't going to let her take any more from me. Months later, I found myself standing at a scenic overlook during a weekend hiking trip. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. I took out my camera, adjusting the lens to capture the moment. Write in the comments. As I snapped the photo, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. Life didn't end with Jenna's betrayal, it started anew. Jenna had underestimated me. She thought I was predictable, someone she could fool indefinitely. But in the end, her lies only served to remind me of my own strength. I was free, unburdened by her deceit, and ready to face whatever came next.